So we could come at this in lots of different ways. There are some points of view which say AI is absolutely gouging creativity. So I'm just going to put that one out here and just make sure we're clear that there are writers, artists, musicians, composers who are, in my view, rightly fearful. Not just of what AI might be doing to their own licensed work, which has copyright from the minute it exists. They don't have to apply for it. It's existed since 1710 statute of Anne. This country was the first to introduce a scheme of licensing. So that's where we once were, and where we are now includes an awful lot of creators who are, in my view, correctly fearful. But Ed has got at his fingertips the details of where we are in policy terms. So I don't know, should we start around there?
Yeah.
About how we got to where we are and where actually are we?
How have we got to where we are? Well, I think the simple answer is that the AI industry today, as we know it, is born of piracy. That is super clear, right? Like ChatGPT, when it was launched, the model that was in ChatGPT was trained on pirated books. You go back to GPT-1, the start of the GPT series, that was trained on 7,000 books that were ripped from an ebook platform, actually by another group, without the knowledge or permission of the authors. I've spoken to the authors, they are not pleased about this. GPT-2 was trained on 8 million documents that were scraped from the internet, loads of news articles, BBC, CNN, loads of copyrighted work. I imagine news organizations are not thrilled about that. No, good. GPT-3 used kind of both approaches, added for the first time Library Genesis, which is a vast pirate library that was created in Russia from the mid-2000s. Library Genesis contains millions of pirated books. Of course, we only know all this, especially the Library Genesis stuff, we only know because of the lawsuits. Like, no one admits this stuff until they're forced to in court and it comes out in these documents. Then, actually, what's really interesting about what then happened with OpenAI is that, of course, a bunch of the early OpenAI people left and founded Anthropic. And like one of the co-founders of Anthropic, Ben Mann, had been at OpenAI. He'd been one of the people who was downloading these pirate libraries at OpenAI. He's admitted this in court. And then one of the first things he did at Anthropic was download them again. And so Anthropic, which is about to be IPO for over $1 trillion, trained its early models on pirated books up until, I think their first model that was not trained on pirated books was Claude 3, at least the first big version of Claude in March 2024. And what that means, by my reckoning, is that they raised almost $1 billion in financing, training on models, using models that were trained on pirated books.
And so it's not really surprising to me. And I come from the creative sector. I come from arts and culture. In fact, let's name things for what they are. Yeah. I've been a musician for 56 years. I'm the chief executive of an organisation called UKAI Opera Association. And honestly, there is an AI impact for us. In fact, some of our members are already trying to work out what they're going to do about it. And I'm also chair this year of the Women's Prize for Non-Fiction, announcing its prize next week. And a lot of authors who print as well as do ebooks and Audible or other Audible-like functions are extremely unhappy because they know all this stuff. Yeah. Like every author I meet has had their work used. Yeah. And what they've been told by various policymakers along the way, I remember myself being told it, by a group of tech bros, and they were all bros, about 3 years ago, and they looked at me with a look, and they said, "Oh, but Thangam, artists have been inspired by other artists for centuries. This is just the same." And I've heard this line everywhere, right, by people who've stolen artists' work. Yeah. This is not the same. No. It is not the same. It is just not the same. And what's more, when artists literally steal each other's work, plagiarize, there are laws, and honestly, they do sue. Because that's your work. So being inspired is, of course, something we absolutely use. But there's one of the famous cases, which is about repeated images. It's actually quite difficult to look at a picture of the stolen work to demonstrate that it was stolen, because you are actually breaking the law by displaying it. But it's around if you want to Google it. I'm sure somebody somewhere will tell you what it is.
Yeah, well, and so human learning and machine learning are obviously to anyone who has ever built an ML system, you will know that they are entirely different processes, right? It's in my mind, it's sort of a very unfortunate accident of history that we call this machine learning, that we use these kinds of words, because I think they do the whole debate a serious disservice. When you train an AI model, you are making copies of millions and millions of works. This does not happen in human learning. You're building an insanely scalable system that theoretically and increasingly now practically can displace the labor, the work of huge numbers of people in a way that an individual can't. So I do think this is really important to make that distinction.
And it's interesting because your chief executive is something called fairly trained, which I think is a really important concept. And certainly when I was Shadow Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sports, in the run up to the last general election, we came up with 3 principles which I think still hold, which are, there was one option which is call for it all to be shut down. It's still an option. It's not the world we're living in, but it is an option. And there are some people who would really like that. But let's just park that one for a moment. Our principles, which we think reflect the 1710 Statute of Anne, are that an artist's work, from the moment it is created, has intrinsic rights, which have to be respected, that you have the right to opt in, not opt out of its use, unlicensed use, that you have the right to have your work recognised as by you and rewarded. And artists' lives, whether they are in visual arts, writing, composing, any of those creative arts, are under huge pressure anyway. Yeah. So for them, and I think possibly for the wider public, this issue of arts and AI is several canaries in possibly several coal mines, to stretch the metaphor. Do you want to remind us how you and I first came across each other, which was in a policy context, which now actually seems like ancient history because we've moved on and yet not moved on?
Well, the policy debate here has gone on and on. And I mean, I think it's interesting. I think one way I look at this actually is looking at the words of someone like Chris Bryant.
Do let's.
Chris Bryant,
Sir
Chris Bryant, sorry, who is an author.
He is
apparently written very good books, and has got his and sort of in his first role, I think, in this government was, I forget what, I think it was a kind of joint minister for DCIT and DCMS, maybe.
Which turned out to be joint minister for screwing the arts.
For screwing the arts, I think is you heard it here first. And he, in 2023, when Labour were in opposition, he was busy tweeting publicly, tweeting Rishi Sunak, saying, AI may have benefits, but have you considered the threat that this poses to creatives' copyright, to their intellectual property, right? 2023, he was saying that publicly, and brilliant. And honestly, I was excited when people like Chris came in as a result.
Because Chris was in my team. He was my junior Shadow Minister for Arts. I regretted the fact that he also had to be junior Shadow Minister for DCIT jointly, because it meant that he was in a tussle between me as Shadow Secretary of State for Arts, Media and Heritage and all the other letters, and Pete Kyle, who was Shadow Secretary of State for DCIT. Yeah. And we had a bit of a showdown, Pete Kyle and I. It was actually by phone. I remember exactly where I was and the circumstance I was in, because he came out with that line that the Tony Blair Institute tech bros had given me so patronisingly, which is that artists have been inspired by artists. This is just the same. And he said exactly the same words. And I thought, what is this? Yeah. And effectively, I was allowed just the words recognition and reward, I think. I now can't remember, but it was it was a fudge, but it was enough for us to be going on with. Yeah. And Chris was supposed to take the agenda that we had as a team discussed, actually with AI companies as well, who wanted to do the right thing. Because of course, as you all know, AI companies who want to treat original creatives well exist. Some of you are in this room, probably. Yeah. So we had what I thought was a coherent set of values. And there then comes along, and you will probably remember the wording better than I just remember my reaction. There then comes along a document in December 2024 in which it becomes apparent that there is a government preferred option for creatives. Yeah. And when I started, I took a deep breath and then I tweeted something about, the law about copyright is actually not unclear, because the document said the law on copyright is unclear. It is not. No. You might want to change it, but it's not unclear. And so I tweeted, here is a handy guide. And Chris Bryant was somewhat irked with me because it turned out that he was the author of this preferred option, which was for artists to have the right to opt out, not to opt in. And there was no mention of licensing and war. That was not worked.
No. Yeah. And
so what happened next?
Well, and
apart
then
from me being irked?
No. Oh, well, I was irked too.
You were irked too.
And I think Chris Bryant was irked with me as well. Because we then did a lot of protesting this because it was, so this proposal was outrageous. The proposal in December 2024, the government's proposal was that basically the entirety of the life's work of this country's creatives should be handed to AI companies for free unless the creative in question had taken the initiative to actually go and opt that out of training. It basically entirely flips the concept of copyright, which in this country vests automatically in work when you create it, and has done for a very long time. And so Sir Chris was up in the Commons, in the Lords, sort of defending this policy, despite the fact that he knew by this point that it was going down incredibly badly with the creative industries. There were protests from musicians, from authors. Elton John ended up going on the BBC and calling Peter Kyle a moron. It really got quite intense. We organised a silent protest album that 1,000 musicians ended up contributing to, just to say, and the track listing on the back just said, the British government must not legalise music theft to benefit AI companies. And actually what was striking about organising that album, which had Kate Bush involved, had Max Richter involved, had all these incredible musicians, but also had this huge number of musicians you've never heard of, because it affects everyone, this question. What was incredibly striking about organising that was how unbelievably easy it was to find 1,000 musicians who wanted to protest this. Everyone was livid with the government. And I think that change from a position of protecting creatives to one that frankly was just repeating talking points from big tech was a big change. And I think it's very interesting to think about what happened from 2023 to December 2024 when Labour had been in power for 6 months. I have views. Exactly. And I would love to hear your views. What happened? What changed it? And who changed it is, I think, a big question for me, because it wasn't just sprung from the minds of Labour's front bench. I think we can be certain of that.
I think we can be certain of that. There was a hard fought for line, which I had been the head of that team. And after the July election, democracy being respected means that I wasn't the head of that team anymore. And what I was hearing from creators, and this may or may not be fair, was that they did not feel that they were getting the hearing that the tech bros were getting. I personally, having checked the lists of ministerial meetings, think that was actually a fair criticism. I do think that's changed since then, because having not taken those meetings, or not in sufficient numbers, it meant that the government affected to be surprised. I did actually say to Chris Bryant, and I will say it in front of his face as he was here, why were you surprised? You knew what our position was. You knew that people were excited about our total programme for arts, culture and heritage. And you knew that this would be like a litmus test of, are you really going to stick up for with the Labour Party? Are you sticking up for the working people in arts and culture? Oh dear, no. And so it became a really obvious sign of something which I think many people can guess at and seems to be followed through, which is the tech industry had said to Number 10, we don't want to be regulated. And this became clear as an amendment went through. Actually, it wasn't the best amendment, but it was a good galvanising campaigning call, which Baroness Bevan Kidron, who's a filmmaker, put through to the data bill that was going backwards and forwards between the Commons and the Lords. And surely by then, nobody in the government could have been surprised that people were very unhappy. Actually, the Labour Party's probably lost a lot of donors as a result. Yeah. Because creative people donated to the Labour Party in the run-up to general election. We could speculate about why they're not going to anymore. I couldn't possibly say. But it's not unconnected. Elton John saying that Pete Carr was a moron will affect whether or not Elton John ever donates to any political party probably ever again. Now, that's a small beer issue for anyone in this room. But I think what we want to hear, probably what some of you are already itching to hear, is, well, what's the alternative? And that seemed to be what the government was saying at that point is, well, we want to come up with a good alternative. Like, one alternative was switch it off, or if you're not going to switch it off, just be clear. There is a law on copyright, and allowing AI companies to take content that is licensed for free and without recognition or permission is breaking that law. You could just say that. They obviously weren't going to say that, and it became clear as we went through the B-Ban amendment going backwards and forwards, that the government was going to dig in its heels and said, we'll get an AI bill to you soon. Come the King's speech 2 weeks ago, AI bill, is there none? So you can draw your own conclusions about who's influencing the government there, about why is there no AI bill, especially as the public is now actually reacting against this lack of regulation with anxiety and fear, some of which, by the way, I think may be unfounded. You can't blame the public for thinking we're a bit scared of this and we think the government doesn't actually want to protect us. So in a way, the overreaction in December 24 was a bad idea. And the overreaction again, which is let's not touch this, it's too difficult, is also a bad idea. So we're left with a vacuum into which I think we can very fairly step, because there are people who want to create systems. You heard from Creative Content Exchange. The Publishers Licensing Association has also got a licensing system for use of published written work to be used by generative AI in ways that are ethical and recognise reward and allow artists to opt in rather than opt out. So things can exist.
They can. I think it's, and actually I want to draw on what the previous panel was talking about here as well, the Creative Content Exchange. You know, I think it's very important that we be realistic about where we currently stand. While there are a handful of AI companies that want to license all of the training data they use, that number is unbelievably small. And I know this because I've spoken to, I think, all of them. What my nonprofit does is it certifies these companies and it certifies their training data. The big companies that we celebrate, there is no sign that they adhere to these principles. I mean, you know, not only do you have the OpenAIs and the Anthropics who started off with piracy and still train on huge amounts of copyrighted work today, you know, but all of the, you know, there are reports that Runway, which I think is opening up a big office in London, there were media reports a while ago that it trained on a ton of YouTube videos that it had scraped. You know, there's no sign of permission there. The 11 Labs, which is constantly being wheeled out by the AI minister here, is, you know, has just, I think maybe 2 weeks ago, been sued by a bunch of voice artists who allege copyright infringement. It's been sued before for the same thing. You know, there are all these, it is by far the standard. And honestly, I mean, I love attempts to make licensing easier. I think they are very important. But the most important thing, beyond anything else, is making sure that the legislative and regulatory landscape is insisting that people license, as it does at the moment in the UK. But the major, you know, we face two major issues with that. One, the government has seemed incredibly minded to change that. And two, these companies go and do it in some other country, and we sort of turn a blind eye. And I think that is actually very damaging as well. And we should be principled about this, because, like, you know, I think the basic answer to your question of what should we do, you know, is we should be building a responsible AI ecosystem. Every AI company under the sun calls themselves responsible. The next time any AI company calls themselves responsible, I strongly recommend saying, I'm curious what you train your models on. And I want to add one thing about that, because I think there's a very important point here about, like, why this is so important. Because I think we have to keep going back to the artists in question. Yeah, and I want to go all the way back to something I said at the start, GPT-1 and what it was trained on. It was trained on these 7,000 books. I said I'd spoken to some of the authors behind those books. These were books that were self-published on a self-publishing platform in the early 2010s. They'd been scraped in about 2014. These authors, until I got in touch with them, my understanding is they had no idea their works had been used by OpenAI. And what they told me was that what they are finding is that AI today is directly competing with them. They were self-published. These authors were New York Times bestsellers, despite being self-published. But what they found is that as AI has risen, there is a huge influx of AI-generated books on Amazon, which is making their books impossible to find. So their sales are going down. we have to remember that generative AI, it's not just the sort of principle of ownership here, which is important. Generative AI competes with the people whose work it's trained on. It competes in books, in art. We know that there was a poll in January 2024, right, 2 years ago. Already by that point, 1 in 4 illustrators said they had lost work to generative AI already. And the models back then were terrible compared to today.
And I think that's another part of this. And it's probably why, in my view, arts and culture, I mean, they're one of the things I care about more than anything else. They're the bit of the economy that I work in, that I work for, and that I've devoted my entire life to. But actually, we're also the canary in the coal mine, because people's concerns about how is AI going to affect my job? Is it going to eliminate my job? Is it going to make my job easier? Is it going to create a new job for my sons and daughters? These are really important questions. And to hear some of the early pioneers who are now billionaires or trillionaires talk, they're like a religion. They want us to believe that AI is going to solve everything. Now, maybe that's true, and maybe that's okay. But when have we, at the moment, I'm not convinced, but when have we, the public, been asked to get involved in this, actually properly involved? And I think this is why UKAI as an organisation, why I'm actually part of UKAI, is because I am a critical friend. And I want to be a constructive critical friend so that we can help shape something in an ethical way, which is the approach I think Tim and his team have taken. Not, sometimes perhaps with criticism attached, I would have thought. And so I admire Tim for taking that on, because at the time when we started exploring this as UKAI, I actually quite a lot of tech companies might have thought, please go away. And some others were like, yeah, no, we want to do this properly.
Yeah.
And I think that really, really matters. Because if you ask the question about transparency, for instance, I spoke to an author friend of mine recently, a dear friend, who said, oh, but Thangam, loads of authors are using AI to write their books. Just get over it, get with the program. And I said, well, on a very basic level as a consumer, I want to know so that I don't buy those books. Because I don't actually want to buy a book by machine learning. I want to buy a book by a human.
Yeah.
That's partly why I buy books by people who are actually out of copyright. You could probably, this is Chekhov. You can do what you want with this, by the way, anyone from AI Institute, because Chekhov's well out of copyright. But I still want to know when I'm reading Chekhov, not a novel in the style of Chekhov. And I think on a very basic consumer rights level, that matters. But we've got a bigger question, which is what is the role of humanity? What is the role of human beings? Where does human rights come into this? Where does our say over what we make, what we paint, what we compose, what we write, what we do at work, even if our jobs are in something completely different? Where does our role come into this? Are we going to allow the governments all over the world, it's not just mine, governments all over the world are going either, oh God, we don't know what to do, so let's not talk about it, which is what I've seen quite a lot of governments do, and pretty much all political parties have gone, we think it's really important, but we don't know what to do about it, other than to say we want more of it because we think it will bring us economic growth. There are several assumptions built into that conclusion, as well as including economic growth at what cost. And I think if we ask ourselves the question, which you and I did when we were talking yesterday, is, well, what is the government afraid of? What is the damage that they think might happen? I mean, do you have a view, Ed, that you want to share from, maybe a thought beyond the one we talked about yesterday? What are they afraid of? What are governments everywhere afraid of?
Look, AI is clearly a powerful technology, right? And that's why we're all talking about it so much. I mean, like we should accept that up front. I think actually one of the most damaging, elements of the discourse at the moment is that actually a lot of artists and creatives refuse to believe that still. I found this back I started a generative AI company in 2010. I worked here in Old Street. And back then you told people AI was going to write music, which is what it was doing, and they thought you were insane. It was like, including investors, by the way, all the people who are now sort of running the show and saying AI is going to change the world. None of them believed it at all. Everyone jumps on the bandwagon as soon as everyone's doing it, right? But it is here and it does work. And I mean, a lot of this conversation has been driven in the US, clearly. Where the US administration is taking generally a pretty deregulatory approach because of the apparent AI race with China. You can probably argue both sides of whether that is an actual thing, but everyone wants to accelerate. Here in the UK, the government is being sold this idea that AI is the route to growth. The government is desperate for growth. Demis Hassabis, there are reports, Demis Hassabis went into cabinet early on and told everyone AI is the route to growth, right? Like and this is what I was talking about earlier in a way, like I think the problem we have at the moment, the main problem in the UK is who is advising the government. The government are basically being advised by, to be frank, the kind of people who are probably here speaking at this conference. They are being advised by execs of AI companies. Demis is a good example. You know, Sir Demis, brilliant, has done amazing things for the UK. Google's AI model, Google is being sued in the US for alleged copyright infringement around how these models are built. I actually wouldn't invite Demis to give that advice, or if I did, I'd make sure that was clear up front. The government is also being advised by like a ton of investors, VCs. These people are some of the closest people to the government, to the Prime Minister, to ministers on this question. They are running the Sovereign AI Fund. They are writing the AI Action Plan. I'm sure they have the country's best interests at heart, but you cannot escape the fact that fundamentally they come from the VC world. They obviously have a ton of vested interests in the AI boom, in AI being further adopted. Now, they may have valid points. They may be giving, you know, I'm sure they're giving what they believe is genuine advice to government, but you cannot solely base your policy on the approaches of VCs, on the approach of AI execs, all of whom have unbelievable amounts of skin in the game. It's just like basic democracy 101, you know?
I was just wondering, so I'm looking at, there's a ticking clock down there and it says 17:34 and counting down. So I'm assuming that means we might have some time for some questions and somebody to say to me and Ed, you're completely wrong, which is fine because democracy is good and debate is really good. I wanted to, is that a good idea, Tim? Or is it, yeah, sure? Are you okay with that, Ed?
Yeah.
Because, you know, we honestly, we can fill the time. I wanted to add a couple of things into that discussion. So you mentioned the closeness of Demis, Hassabis, and various VC companies to the government.
Yeah.
I do not think that the heads of publishing houses or writers or musicians or composers have quite the same level of access. And I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that I'm not wrong. And I also remember very well when I was in Shadow Cabinet and we were hosted by Google in King's Cross for a Shadow Cabinet away day. Not very far, not a day, but it was away from the office, I suppose. And I think over a very nice lunch, we were given a presentation, which for many of us, myself included, was the first time we'd been, this was about 22 maybe, could have been 23, but you know, about a year, 18 months, 2 years out from the GE. And a very nice group of women who were all very clever, and the fact that it was women was important because I couldn't call them tech bros, gave us a presentation which gave us basically the thing that every politician longs to hear: I can help you cure cancer. Every politician wants to be able to stand up on stage and say, we're going to have a cure for cancer. Mm. And that is, in my view, it is a cult technique which is being really well used because it's both, we are the answer to everything that's wrong with the economy, but also we're going to cure cancer, you politician people. And we love that stuff. And we did it in Google Towers. We had a lovely lunch. And, you know, it's very insidious, that approach, in my view. And I think we just have to be, it doesn't mean Google shouldn't be allowed to lobby. Of course it should. I think all companies should be allowed to lobby. I think AI companies should be allowed to lobby. But I think also when you're having a competing contested futures issue like this, it is telling, and you can look this up too, you can judge for yourselves, who were the ministers meeting in the run-up to the AI consultation? Were they from the tech industry or were they from the creative industry, or were they even-handed? Have a look. It's out there. It's public information because we have a transparent approach to government. I'd love to hear more about what people think. I've been waving my arm because I wanted to demonstrate my commitment to honouring artists and their rights. This was actually my second tattoo. My first was the tattoo that you get when you have breast cancer, which is why I was susceptible to the "we're going to cure breast cancer," and they knew it. But this poem is by Robert Montgomery, And I didn't get the tattoo until I got in touch with Robert and met him and asked his permission. And he had given it and had a photograph taken, and he's subsequently taken a photograph of him with the tattoo.
Nice.
Now, that matters to me, because I bet most people don't do that, by the way. That was probably just because I was a politician, and I thought I really ought to chat with this guy if he minds. He might be, a Tory voter or something. Might not want it. And he did. But I think we need to live out our beliefs. If we believe that living artists have a right to be recognised, rewarded, and have permission for them to grant, we need to live it out. And that includes, which I think UKAI has done really well, how we think about what an ethical system for AI might look like. And I think artists are the canaries in the coal mine, because actually I think human beings need to be involved just in the whole thing. I think a lot of human beings don't know about agentic AI and do not know how much they're involved already in decisions about when and where to fire weapons. I don't think they know that. Yeah. I don't think people know how much AI is involved in our democracy. I don't think people know these things. And I don't want to say shut it down, but there comes a point in a 24-hour cycle every day where I do have that thought, because we haven't addressed this.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. And I just want to pick up on one thing you just mentioned about living out our beliefs. And this is actually one of my biggest concerns at the moment with the government and the people around the government. We had this huge debate around the data bill. It became clear, I think, to the government that actually it wasn't going to be easy to shove through a change to copyright law. It would cause uproar. Frankly, it would probably make them lose in the next election, as far as I can tell. People were so angry. What I think is happening now is that the government is, in my view, trying to sort of brush the issue under the carpet while not stopping it. And I want to give a specific example of this that is very close to my heart at the moment, which is the Sovereign AI Fund. Yeah. So the Sovereign AI Fund, I think, is basically an admirable idea, 500 million quid, try to boost our AI industry, do a lot of it through investment in companies, fantastic. A number of people, including myself, including members of the House of Lords, have been repeatedly asking the Sovereign AI Fund one question, which is, what is your policy on backing companies that train on copyrighted work without a license? We would hope the answer is, we will not back those companies. The ministers have previously said, we think consent is important, all of this stuff. You would hope. Now, sometimes we can't shape US law, we can't dictate what they do, but what we can do is we can decide how we invest taxpayer funds. Every time and this happened in the Lords 2 days ago, the government responded to this question again, but they give a non-response. What they say is, we'll only back companies that adhere to UK law. Now that's not a response, because UK law doesn't say anything about what happens if you're a company and you go train your models in the US and then you bring them back here. So it's an intention, at this stage, it's got to be intentional. They've been told this, it's been flagged to them. They know that they are evading the question, and they're evading the question. Why is that worrying? Because it strongly suggests, in my view, that they are not only open, but probably actively keen to invest in companies who do go and train on copyrighted work abroad. That's terrible. We should not be doing that. I think they know, I think the people running it know, that if it ever went to a debate in the Commons or the Lords, everyone would object to that and say, obviously, ask a question about training. If they're training on copyrighted work without a license in the US, in Singapore, in Japan, in the UK, wherever they're doing it, just don't back them. Let's incentivize responsible AI development. They don't answer the question because they want to sweep the issue under the carpet. They will continue to evade this. We are going to continue asking it. They will continue to evade it. And it's a very bad sign. And I think what we need is the politicians of the country to live out there. But if they believe it, if Chris Bryant and others, he's by far from the only one, but he tweeted in 2023, so I talk about him. If they truly believe that creative rights are important, as they have said in the Lords and the Commons repeatedly, they have to live that out. And at the moment, they are hugely failing to do so, in my view.
We've got 10 minutes, and I can see colleagues hovering with mics, and it would be great if you could use the mic. I'm getting old, I do actually need the help. If there's anyone who just wants to raise their hands, yep, straight away. That was quick. I'm going to write your question down with my pen and in my notebook.
Thank you very much for the talk. I was wondering what you think the creative industries can do practically to move this in the direction that we want. Yeah. There's obviously things that we would like the government to do and that can be sort of lobbied in that direction. But a year ago, around the review, the industries came together almost like never before around united against that thing that we didn't want. But sometimes it can be a lot harder to unite. The creative industries, as we all know, are really disparate. There's so many sectors within that, different data forms. How can we unite to create a path forward?
I think there's two things that have to happen in parallel. One is get on board with being part of your industry sector's licensing system. So PLS is the first. DAX for visual artists is working on it. PRS for music at a much earlier stage. I think where those systems exist, which exist in licensing systems that are already, licensing organizations that already exist, that already have a principle of rewarding the artists in their sector, I would say work with them if you're in that sector. I think with the broadcast sector, it's slightly different, but they obviously want to do the same. I think grapple with them in industry-specific organisations. So I think for screen, TV and film need to battle it out in an internal discussion in the British Screen Forum and then come out united. Just as publishing's had to do. Not everyone in publishing would have agreed, but they've now come out with an agreed position and a system and a way that it's early days, but let's see how it works. But the other thing is do not stop keeping up the pressure. Because the reason I say create your own licensing schemes together with unity across sectors and with consultation between sectors is because the door's already wide open. There's a look behind you question. So get on board now quick, but also because that works as a name and shame device, but also it's a way of saying to the government, if you don't back us, we're working really against the grain here, because you cannot stop keeping the pressure on government and keep asking your own representatives, where is the regulation we were promised? Where is the regulation that the Lord's Digital Committee said, and quite rightly, is needed? Where is what the two Secretaries of State, Liz Kendall, the Secretary of State for Science and Technology and the Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, both said in January, it's coming, here it isn't. Where is it?
Yeah.
Thank you.
We've got 2 minutes for one more question.
Great. Hey.
Thank you so much for a great talk. So this is sort of a hypothetical one, but it's a wide-ranging question. So you talked a lot about, regulation coming into play to protect artists, essentially, and just that we need to incentivize the creation of responsible AI. How do we, let's say in a hypothetical world, that those regulations were put in place, how do you enforce them? If this is happening so often, as you're saying, that artists are having their work taken without their consent to train AI, I just wonder if regulations are the answer.
I think the answer is transparency requirements. Unfortunately, the government has not accepted multiple demands for transparency requirements. AI companies, the problem with this kind of copyright infringement, is that it's sort of one of the first major types of copyright infringement that happens behind closed doors. Mostly, if someone's ripping off DVDs and selling them in the street, you can see it's happening. They might run away, but you've seen it's happening. Here you have to, you can't see it. We know it is from lawsuits and from red teaming, but otherwise transparency requirements would solve this. Now, AI companies will say, and do say, this is our secret source. We can't give away the source of our training data. In my mind, there is no credibility to this. You don't have to require people to tell you every element of their training system and what they're doing, like what they're using for reinforcement learning, what they're using for pre-training, what they're using for different parts. You don't have, all you need is a list of sources of training data. I know because we do this at Fairly Trained. This is how we certify companies. We ask for a list of sources of training data, okay? You do that, you implement audits, you can then, I think, very reliably know what people are training on. AI companies saying they don't want to do this is, I think it's pretty clear that the main reason they actually don't want to do this is because as soon as they reveal what they're training on in the UK, there are already 100 lawsuits happening around this in the US. There'll be 1,000 the next week as soon as they reveal what they're training on, because everyone will sue them. In my mind, rightly so. But that is not a reason not to do it. I firmly believe in transparency requirements. Every AI company should be required to reveal what they train on. They all train on pretty much the same data anyway. It's not like scraping Reddit was like a massive stroke of genius. It's not like using library genesis was this moment of innovation. No, it's just theft, and it's theft that everyone is doing. Make them show you what they're doing. And any refusal to do that, in my mind, is an absolute failure of the government's responsibility to our creative industries and to our creatives, in my mind.
We've gone 45 seconds over. So I just want to say thank you to all of you. And it's been a really, really, really interesting for me and Ed to sort of wrestle with this problem more and more and more. I just think, if builders are stealing bricks to build a house with, they might do it in the middle of the night so you didn't know, but eventually you have to arrest them. So that's my analogy for what Ed just said, but he said it clever.
I like it.
Thank you all so much, and thank you so much, Tim, for welcoming us to UKAI House.